Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us this month. This is the May OpenNTF webinar for 2025, and it is the second in our Domino for Newbies series. This month we're focusing on admin tips and tricks, and our presenters are Kim Greene and Michelle Smith. As per usual, we'll do a couple of quick introductory comments and then jump right into the presentation. You're certainly welcome to ask questions as we go along, but we tend to save those for the end so that they can get properly recorded and then shared in the recording on YouTube later. Just a couple of quick thank yous. By the way, my name is Graham Akers. I'm the chair of the board of OpenNTF, and with me today is Jesse Gallagher from the board, moving the levers behind the scenes. Just quickly saying thank you to our sponsors. HCL and Prominic have been made an ongoing long-term commitment to OpenNTF to make sure that we're available to run for the community, and we thank them both for their contribution. And as always, a quick note about who OpenNTF is. And in fact, our position is that OpenNTF is not the board. OpenNTF is everyone. We're the community, everybody that participates, right from folks inside of HCL all the way down to everybody that's using the product across the world. And you know, the whole idea is that we're here to help each other learn and share what we know. We all do volunteer items, and you know, whether that's asking questions or answering questions in Discord, or helping out with some documentation or sending some feedback. No effort is too small. And again, we all learn and benefit when we all participate. So if you'd like to get involved, Discord is the right way to do that, or you can get in touch with us. Our contact information is on the OpenNTF website. And we on the board pretty much know almost everybody in the community and can help connect to kind of take ideas and bring them forward to share with the community. A couple of quick notes about upcoming events. So next week in The Hague in the Netherlands is Engage, and hopefully by now, if you're planning on going or not going, I guess you know, but we certainly encourage people to participate in these groups. Every time we do in-person events, certainly especially since COVID, but before then too, it's just a much better way to connect and have a casual conversation with somebody. And again, bring your questions for HCL or share ideas. As it turns out, OpenNTF has got lots of things going on at Engage. We have a roundtable where we're going to talk about a new server that has been sort of pre-launched, but we're ready to share it with the world now, which is a community notes server. And the roundtable will get into those details. We've also got an announcement coming up next week on that, so keep your eyes open for that. If you're not going to Engage, we're going to have that posted to YouTube shortly. But then we also have several individual presentations. Heiko, Sidar, Keith, and Roberto from the board are all there and giving one or more presentations, so you can check that out too. And then a quick heads up for what's coming in June. We've got a webinar. Paul Withers and Stefan Wissel, who were key to the Domino REST API development, they're coming back and have a development topic that they're going to share with us. There will be no open mic in May, primarily because the teams at HCL are all really busy. We're efforting to get one organized for June, so keep your eyes open for the announcement on that one. And again, all of those past recordings are available on YouTube, on the YouTube OpenNTF channel. This is kind of a call. Jesse put this in here, and I think this is great. We're always interested, certainly in suggestions for webinars, but also feedback. Let us know what you think of particular presentations, and if there's an idea of something that you would like to see, or if there is an idea of something you would like to present. Perhaps you've had ideas submitted to either speak at Engage or CollabSphere or other conferences that haven't made the cut just because there's so much good content out there. We're happy to record those things. They don't even have to be live. We can fit them in as a webinar if we want to do something live, or we can just record it as a video and post it into the YouTube channel and give you a chance to share your ideas with the world. So please do give us feedback. Again, ideas or comments, everything is welcome. We want to again, we're well plugged into everybody in the community and can find somebody who can speak about a particular topic if you have some kind of interest. So please do engage. And the way to do that is on Discord. So here's the link for the Discord server. This is the way to ask your questions. There's lots of discussion channels there. We certainly encourage everybody who's a part of the community to jump in and participate there. And certainly there are specific feedback channels that are open to HCL folks who lurk around and watch what's going on. And sometimes that's the best way of getting your question answered. So please join us there. Okay, as far as questions go, like I said, during the presentation, you're welcome to type your questions into the questions panel and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Yes, this is being recorded and yes, it's going to be on YouTube, but please do use the questions panel as we go along here. And with that, I will hand it over.
Hello and welcome everyone to our Domino Administration for Newbies session. My name is Kim Greene and myself and Michelle Smith are going to be presenting this webinar today. So a little bit of background about myself. I started my career many years ago at IBM, actually working on back then the AS400, now known as the IBM I. And that's when I first got introduced to, then it was called IBM Domino. It had just been renamed from Lotus Domino to IBM Domino, which now we know lovingly as HCL Domino. I left in 2000, of April 2000, so I've been doing this for a long time. And we provide a variety of services for our customers around the world. We certainly do a lot of administration work for our customers. Certainly that's one of the reasons why we're doing this session. We do tons of troubleshooting, lots of upgrades. We also do health checks, performance reviews, security reviews. We make changes for applications for customers. We do a lot of integration with backend systems like DB2, since a lot of our customers do run on the IBM I. I used to work in the operating system performance on IBM I, so performance optimization is certainly an area I have my hands in. So we do lots of pretty much everything. We're extensions of IT departments around the world. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I'll turn it over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kim. I'm Michelle Smith, also the owner of an IT consulting company, and I started fixing IT issues back when I was in university during some work terms, and it's then that I kind of got the bug and learned I love solving the puzzles that come with IT, so I've stuck with it since then for many, many years now. My first exposure to, back then, Lotus Notes and Domino was migrating a non-Y2K compliant mail environment to Domino. The company first went and set up Domino for rooms and reservations, actually, and then they realized, well, that's a system that we may want to migrate our non-2K compliant mail system to. So that's when it was rolled out in the company. Focus areas also HCL collaboration software portfolio. Kim listed all the items that we do for our clients, and most of my days are spent working with Kim to support. We have a great group of clients, and we enjoy working with them and helping them through their business needs. Handed it back over to Kim.
Okay, thank you. So let's take a look at our agenda. The first thing we're going to do is something I think is really critical, especially when you're new to Domino administration, is what exactly is Domino? A lot of people think it's mail, but it's actually a lot of other things. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about the Domino infrastructure. What are all the different nuts and bolts and pieces that make up a Domino server? And then we're going to move into talking about mail routing, how calendaring and scheduling works on the server, how you can monitor your servers and be proactive with that. Just tools that are available to you for free. And then we're going to move into talking about critical server maintenance to make sure that you're keeping your servers healthy, your database is healthy, and then cover security fundamentals. Certainly we could spend days talking about security, but we're going to give you basically the building blocks again of security on a Domino server. And then we're going to wrap it up talking about Domino's high availability option, which is called clustering, and then replication, which is a key part of that. So let's go ahead and get started. So what exactly is Domino? Well, it's lots and lots and lots of things. And people know it as email, but it's so much more. It does obviously calendar and scheduling because it's not people use their calendars a lot. But people often don't think of it as being a web server. You don't even have to use calendaring or scheduling or email. You can have it completely as a web server. It has built-in security, which Michelle's going to cover, again, the security fundamentals, but I think it's really key that that's just built in. You don't have to buy something separate to secure your Domino environment. It's all available to you. It's just knowing what bells and whistles to adjust. It has something called replication, which is extremely powerful. So this gives you the ability to have more than one replica of a Domino application or mail file on a client or on servers, and that keeps the replication functionality keeps things synchronized. So this works great if you have people that are working in like a low bandwidth area, for example. They can work offline, get back to where they have a good network connection, they can replicate in. So it's a very, very powerful functionality, again, built right in. Domino has a high availability capability called clustering. And then there's a whole application development environment that comes with Domino. And I know that the Newbies for Developers session was done last month. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to that, that'd be a great one to listen to. Has multiple programming languages, tend to evolve, obviously, as new programming languages come in, they get invoked and embedded into Domino as well. And there's a lot of access to outside databases for lots of relational databases. Again, a lot of our customers have DB2, so they have a lot of access to those backend databases, but certainly can integrate with other external databases as well. And then there's a whole set of administration function that just comes with the Domino server. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is use it. So we're going to cover a lot of these areas as we go through the session. So the first section we want to talk about is the Domino infrastructure. And there's lots of core pieces that make up your Domino server. So there's key databases. And these aren't the only databases, but these are the key ones. So the first one is your Domino directory, which is your names.nsf. And we're going to go into detail as far as the different types of documents that are stored in there. There's also the admin for, or the administration process database that you'll be working in as an administrator. You want to be monitoring your log files. We're going to talk about that. For your mail functionality, we have mail.box files. So you can have multiple mail.box files, mail 1, mail 2, mail 3, mail 4, whatever. Any different types of activities happening on your server that you want to monitor, you can set that up in your events for, or your event and configuration database. Your statistics would be stored in your stat rep database. And then we have something called Domino domain monitoring. So based on different types of probes that you set up in your events database, then you can look at reports. And again, we're going to look at some examples of this. And then the catalog. So what are all the different databases that comprise your server? So those are really your key databases for a Domino server. And as far as critical documents, now these documents, all of these listed here, are contained in your Domino directory, so the names.nsf database. So you've got server documents, configuration documents, internet site, connection program, person, group documents. We'll go through each one of these. And then there's something called the Notes INI file. I tend to think of that as kind of like the brain of the Domino server. And again, we'll show you an example and talk about that. So the Domino directory, which is names.nsf, are also known as your primary address book. It contains a whole set of different types of documents. It also would include any of your certificates, your for your person docs and things of such, your access control list for controlling security, and then any replication schedules. And again, we'll go through this and give you some specific examples. So the admin P process is actually a separate task that runs in the Domino server. So the Domino server has multiple tasks that run on it. One is actually called admin P, and it works and it writes basically its contents, and the things it's working on are controlled in the admin4 database. So what's really important to know as a new administrator is this is your friend. If you're not aware of the of admin P, it's certainly something you want to make sure you read up on. It does really key things for you. So for example, just under name management, if you have somebody that has a name change, right? Sometimes somebody, they come in and their name gets misspelled, and you maybe have to correct the spelling, or somebody has a life-changing event. They get married, they get divorced, and that whole rename process happens. If you're going to be deleting a user, you don't go in and select the person document, hit the delete key, you hit the delete person button, and the whole set of functions get fired off automatically on the Domino server. And again, this is all kept track of in this admin4 database. So is something that you want to make sure that you're using, and you're thinking about what are the functions that I'm doing, and is this automated? And there's a lot of really great information in help database about this. So as far as the settings that directly impact that server task, the admin P tasks, you would actually go into your server document, go to the server tasks tab, and then there's the administration process tab. And so, for example, you could control the number of threads, you could change intervals of when your normal requests happen or delayed requests happen, things of such. So just to know that this is where those types of settings are set up and stored for the admin P process. Log files, these are your friends. You need to make sure that you're monitoring your log files, you're looking at these. You'll hear also referred to as a console log, and that content is going to be written to your log.nsf. And this is your main log for your Domino server. And it's going to record all different types of server activity. Gives you a lot of information about what users are connecting to the server, what databases they're accessing, what agents are running on the server, all kinds of different things. You can see there are multiple views on the left navigation here. We're just showing the miscellaneous view, which then allows you to drill into specific dates that are the data that's stored in the log. But if you're looking at replication events or security events or mail routing related events, you can just go to that specific view. So extremely, extremely valuable, extremely helpful. There's also, if you have any web activity on a Domino server, you're going to want to make sure that you have DOM-log enabled. And this allows you to get all kinds of information about HTTP requests that are coming into a server. So here we're looking at the view requests by date. And it gives you a good indicator of just how much activity you have in a given month. And then you can drill down again into each one of those months and individual days. You can see exactly what's happening. So if somebody's having trouble connecting, you can find out maybe their credentials aren't valid, or maybe they don't have the correct access. But it can be very, very helpful. If you're doing any kind of mail routing, even if you're not using Domino for mail, more than likely you have applications that are running that are sending emails out as part of the workflow. And all those emails, basically, those emails get delivered into the mail.box files and distributed from there. It's the delivery threads that are going to handle it if it's local to that server, and the transfer threads if it's sending it off to another server or externally. You also have the catalog.nsf, which is basically, think of it kind of as it's a list of all of the databases on your server. And you can see there's many different views. It's actually a really good admin tool. So if you want to find out what are all the applications that I have on this server, I want to look and see, maybe I have some missing. I can go into application. I can look by category, by replica ID, by title, by server. In addition, it's really nice that you can actually look and see what your access control lists look like. And Michelle's going to be talking about this more later as far as what ACLs are. But you can go by level, and it's really important to understand, how many databases have manager, who has designer, editor, all the different levels of access to databases. So it's a real quick way to get a good snapshot of that information. And then also you have the ability to do something called a domain search. So if you want to look for certain applications, or you want to look for any documents that contain, this specific word, for example, as long as those are set up in your domain search, then you can use this function right directly in your catalog. Okay, so now let's switch. Those are the key databases. So let's switch to the actual server document. This is basically a very, very important document that defines lots of information about your server. So what its name is, what your Domino domain name is, all your security settings, any network definitions that you have defined. And we already looked at, you can go in and you can make changes to settings specific to the admin P task, with also agent manager and other tasks. And your transaction logging, which is used for helping with recovery, web server configuration. There's a whole host of things in the server document. This is an example of a server document. You see multiple tabs across the top. So just on this basic tab, we see our server name, you put a title in, lots of people do, your Domino domain, what the fully qualified internet host name is. We can see if it's part of a cluster or not. And then you can see what release level the Domino server is running, what mail routing kinds of functions it has. and SMTP if the SMTP listener is enabled, and what the operating system is, how many CPUs. So this gives you some real good information. But each one of these tabs has a whole host of information about it. There's also something called an internet site document, and this basically allows you to be able to host multiple websites, so to speak, on one Domino server. Just a couple of examples are listed at the top there, but this is actually in that server document on the Basics tab, and you'll see that if load internet configurations from server internet site documents, if that's enabled, then you're going to be using internet site documents. Otherwise, they'll just be on the Internet Protocols tab of the server document. So one thing that's key to remember, and this is even experienced administrators will forget about this, internet site documents are very key for each protocol. So if you say, okay, I'm primarily using this for web serving, then I'm obviously going to create my web internet site document. But if this server also happens to be providing LDAP services or providing SMTP inbound or providing POP3 or IMAP, those functions, you need to create an internet site document for each one of those protocols. So that's a key thing that can get overlooked. Then we have a configuration document. So this contains a lot of, again, you can see the various tabs here. You can see there's a basics tab, we've got security, we've got all kinds of information about your routing and your SMTP, really, really, really critical. What happens during any MIME conversions. You can set your notes initialization settings here. It's more user-friendly here to set it, so you don't have to worry about having a typo, because you can typically just select an OSINI setting and set that up. Activity logging, diagnostics, there's just a whole host of, again, more parameters that you set up in the configuration document for your Domino server. Or you can have it be for a group. So you see at the very top parameter here, I actually have a group name or a server name, so I could put in a group, and this applies to all of to multiple servers, or typically you do that for servers in a cluster. Connection documents are very, very important. They basically control how servers are interacting and connecting with each other. It's really, really key to setting up and saying, okay, which servers are replicating and what data is replicating between servers? How is mail routing? You can also set it up so that it's really important to have these if you actually have a pass-through server, so that your notes are basically acting as a router for some of your other servers. So let's take a quick peek at what these look like. So a connection document here, we have an example in our basics tab. We have our source server on the left, and then our Domino domain. Our port is going to be TCP/IP, and then we have our destination server. And here you can put in, if you have DNS issues or your servers aren't resolving properly, you could put in your network address here, or you also could put in your fully qualified internet domain name. And then clicking on the replication and routing tab, we see that we have the replication is enabled. We're going to be doing a pull push, and we're just doing these 4 key system databases in this example. If this was blank, it would just say everything that has the same replica ID gets replicated. You can specify files to not, or directories even, to not replicate. Maybe you don't want some of your templates replicating. And then whether you have mail routing enabled or not, here, if we have, even if one message is pending, we're going to go ahead and push that. And then we have the schedule tab. We have it enabled, and it's going to basically be throughout the entire day, and the repeat interval of 5 minutes every single day. So you can see you have a lot of granularity in what these connection documents do, but really, really key as far as how servers are communicating with each other. A couple of other things too. Another really important thing I should say to point out on connection documents is if you mail routes automatically between Domino servers, but it's really dependent on something called the notes named network. And the way you find that, how it's set on in an individual server, again, this is in the server document. Go to your ports tab and then the notes network ports, and you look to see what this notes network is set to. The default will be TCP/IP network, but I've seen it set to random values. It might be TCP/IP1. It might be I could call it Kim's network. Doesn't really matter. But if I have a server that's part of TCP/IP network for its notes name network that needs to replicate with a server that's in Kim's network, I need a connection document because they're not in that same notes name network. Program documents are great ways to automate running server tasks, and you have quite a lot of granularity because you can schedule them and say, when do I want these to run? So this is an example of the DBMT, the database maintenance tool, and Michelle will be talking about that later. Running on this specific server and runs at 2 a.m. every day. Again, you can adjust the days of the week, the times. If I wanted it to run all day long, but every 5 hours, I could specify that by specifying, from midnight until, 11:59 p.m. and then a repeat interval of 5 hours or whatever you wanted. This is another example, just a fix-up, a very common one that customers oftentimes need this for databases that have a lot of contention on them. You could pass in your parameters. Here we have our fix-up -f and -j for the transaction logging, and then just the name of the database, and scheduled to run only on Sundays at 3 a.m. So just some examples. Person documents, they contain information obviously about people. And when you register a person in your Domino environment, you're going to get a person document, and it's going to contain all kinds of information. You can see here's first name, last name, what the user ID or short name is, where the mail file, which server the mail file resides on, what their mail file name is, and all kinds of other information. Contains their certificate details, any other information you want to put in, like their work address or phone numbers and such. Group documents are basically it can be lists of users, of servers, or also of groups. So you can actually have these nested, and they're typically used for access control lists. So instead of saying on an individual database, I want to give Joe and Tim and Mary and Elizabeth access to this database, you create a group and you specify what those users then can access. So they're very, very helpful. You can also use those for mailing lists as well. And basically, it just simplifies your administration. Okay, so your Notes INI, this is really the last main component in this section of your infrastructure. I consider this kind of the brains of the server. It's actually just a raw text file is kind of, in essence, what it looks like. But it contains a lot of key information. What is your Domino? What is your directory structure? What size is your buffer pools, and what tasks start automatically when your server starts? What tasks run at certain times of the day? What your DST time settings are, and there's all kinds of parameters that are in there. So very, very important to understand these key components. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle to talk about mail routing and mail clients.
Wow, thanks, Kim. Now you can take a sip of water, I think. So yes, mail routing. So in a Domino environment, you're going to see two possible types of routing protocols, and that would be Notes Domino routing, and that's the sometimes client to server, and then more often server to server mail routing, and that's over NRPC. That's our port 1352 using the Notes Remote Procedure Call protocol. So that's very, very typical in an environment, and often a Domino server will also do internet routing, sometimes called internet routing, and specifically SMTP, which is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. We'll dive into those a little bit more here. So with your Notes mail, as we said, also called internal mail or NRPC, that's mail sent from one Notes user to another typically. The user may be on the same Domino server or another Domino server in your environment. It could be in your local geography, it could be across the country, it could be across the world, as long as they're in your same Domino domain. And there's also SMTP mail. So this kind of call external mail or internet mail. And that's the mail typically seen as sent from one company to another. So one organization's mail system to another. And that's the standard for all mail sent to and from the internet. And it's not actually related to Notes mail. What you'll see is, all Domino servers will send Notes mail. And then most are optionally configured to send and receive SMTP mail. We don't have all servers sending SMTP out or taking SMTP in. So when we look at different mail protocols, a Domino server can support a number of different types of mail clients. One is POP3, and this allows users running a POP3 client to access mail right on their Domino mail file. You really just have to start a task on the Domino server, and provided the user is set up properly, they're popping down their mail. So POP3 is only for receiving mail, so that client would use SMTP to send the mail out through this, could be the same Domino server or another Domino server. And POP3 clients don't actually access Domino applications. It's just for that simple mail protocol, pulling down your mail. Although I have in the past set up my Notes client to pop down mail from another mail account I had. So technically you could use your POP3 client if it's Notes to access Domino applications, but generally no. There's also IMAP, and this allows users running an IMAP client to access mail in the Domino mail file as well. You'd have to prep the mail file first. And this enables that disconnected mail operation. It synchronizes your mail with the server. IMAP lets you organize your mail much more than your POP would. And this also uses SMTP to send and LDAP to access the Domino directory. And just a word on those two protocols. What I see in Domino use typically now, if you need to set up POP or IMAP, it's usually for a third-party product that's interfacing with Domino, and they'll want to use one or the other. So that's what we've kind of seen in practice. Next slide, please. There's also HTTP mail. So that's your web-based mail accessed completely through a browser. Outside of a Domino environment, you'd see this Yahoo or Gmail, and you can access your Notes mail file using a browser, and you could use either the iNotes experience or now the much more modern Verse experience through a web browser. And not to forget about HCL Traveler. This allows you to use your mobile device for a mail client. You could have a product called Verse Mobile on your phone, or actually syncing with your native mail application on your phone. And there's also Traveler for Microsoft Outlook, and that would give those people in your organization, if they are insistent on using Outlook, that would be an option for you to set up. It would usually be a specific Traveler server built for this purpose set up, and you can start giving some of those people access to Outlook, to Domino. A little more about mail routing. So there's a router task runs on your Domino server. It routes mail internally and to other Domino servers. And a little about how it works. I know Kim touched on it briefly, but the router will monitor your mail.box, or sometimes it's mail1.box, mail2.box, and it monitors for new messages, and it'll transfer those messages to other servers as well, or it delivers the message to a local mail file. The router task can actually transfer mail using NRPC or SMTP, and it converts it. If it needs to convert the messages from the internally stored Notes rich text format to an internet MIME format, it will do that conversion as well. The router task, there's a routing table that is comprised of information that is in the Domino directory, and as Kim says, the brains of the Domino server, the Notes INI, and it gathers that together and it keeps track of a routing table. So the router knows, Joe Smith is on this server, I'm going to put it in this mail file locally, but Kim Jones is on another server, I'm going to send it over to that server for delivery. So a little about SMTP in general. This is internal or external mail routing. It allows Domino to send, receive mail to, from other SMTP servers. So that's generally speaking your company to company mail flow over the internet. How SMTP works. So your sending server checks the recipient's address, looks up that domain in DNS, gets the MX records for the domain, finds the IP address for that server, and then sends the information. It does a handshake with the receiving server and sends the information over TCP/IP, usually over port 25, transfers the message, and then closes that connection. So that's how SMTP works. And we put in a nice diagram because I don't know about you, but I always like pictures. So this kind of just explains what we just went over. And you can look at that later if you want. So on to calendaring and scheduling. So calendaring and scheduling is that part that provides the free time lookup for meeting scheduling and reserving rooms in your environment. Remember I said back during the introduction, the first time I worked with Notes and Domino, the system was set up specifically for the rooms and reservations system. So, back in the, I'm going to say early 90s, that was seen at that time, probably mid 90s, that was seen at that time as a great system just for the rooms and reservations component alone. And that function on a server is utilizing the schedule manager, the calendar connector, if you're looking up free and busy time across servers. And the free time system in general is a combo of the schedule manager and the calendar connector and other tasks. And then, not to be forgotten, the resource and reservations manager that handles and processes those room bookings. Free time databases in general are maintained on the server, and it depends on whether or not your server is in a cluster or not. So if it's not in a cluster, you'll see the database is busytime.nsf, and in a cluster, you'll have CLU busy on each of the servers in the cluster. And there's times when we've had to rebuild these databases if you're having issues with free time lookup for people. So the Rooms and Resource Manager, this is a separate task and again processes all the rooms and resource activities. So all those, you're as a chairperson of a meeting, you invite a room, it's set that request is actually emailed to the Rooms and Reservations database, and the task will take a look. Is there time for that resource? Is it available? And it'll process the requests. Sometimes you can even have people have to approve your request before it's booked, that type of thing. So that's all managed by this task in this database. And this will update your busy time or CLU busy database accordingly. So it keeps that accurate in your environment. And one thing we have noticed, so we added a tip that often updating the design of your resources database can be missed in an upgrade. So just remember to upgrade that database or see if it needs to be upgraded when you do a Domino upgrade, and make sure it's kept in step with your Domino environment. There's always new features being released. And back to Kim for monitoring the servers.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So one of the things that's really nice to know about is directly in your administration client, if you go to the server tab and status and then click on server tasks, you'll see a list of all your tasks that are running on your server. And it's a good idea if you haven't, if you've been on this tab and you go to another tab and you come back, do F9 to refresh. You can actually sort it. So lots of times I like to sort it alphabetically. But what's really nice is it tells you to see all the tasks that are running, and you can see what they're doing. So we can see right now that LDAP server is listening on port 389, but it's not doing anything, right? We don't actually have any of the tasks that are listed here that are actually actively doing something. But if you're running fix-up on a database or running updal on a database, when Michelle's going to talk more about those later in the presentation, you would see exactly what those tasks are up to. So it's really helpful to see, hey, what's active? If you're seeing something doesn't seem right, one of the great places to come is see what tasks are specifically active. The other thing you can do is you can actually monitor your servers, and I find that lots of people don't even know about this. Again, it's just functionality that's available to you. So again, on that server tab, you click on monitoring, and you'll see here that it lists all of your servers, and it lets you get, at a very quick glance, you can see what's going on with your servers. So we can see we have multiple servers listed, with 2 listed here that are showing, and it shows the tasks that are running, and then any specific statistics we happen to be interested in. And you can adjust all this, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But what's really neat is you can see that here I can see, well, this task isn't running. Router is not running on this server. So I can see that really very quickly graphically. And it's not only running, it's just not running during that one specific time frame from 8:21 to 8:23 a.m. And then that would be something to go and investigate, right? And then you can see that, hey, there happens to be some errors that were associated with Agent Manager. Well, I'm not certain what those are. Well, one thing that's nice is you can just hover over any of these little icons and it'll give you pop-up information for you. So again, lots of things that are built in that you can just simply use to monitor your server. So what you can do is, by default, all of your servers in the domain are going to be monitored, but you could actually create your own specific profile. And the way you do that is you click on monitoring, and then you can specify what it is that you want to do. Make sure that if you've done this, to make sure you save your changes, because you can create new ones, and if you don't save them, then you go next time and it's not available. But then you can just click the pull down next to monitoring profiles, and you can see here we have AKH domain. We could set it up and have it be Kim's domain or Kim's favorites or whatever you whatever you want to call it. So the way that you would create some new monitors is you would just click on monitoring, and here if we clicked on monitor new task, it gives us a list of the server tasks. And so I would just select the specific server tasks that I want to now start monitoring. Michelle was just talking about how important having the R&R manager is. If that's something that server function that provides, you might want to monitor that. You can also monitor for specific statistics, and once you select monitor new statistic, it will give you a dialog, and then you can scroll into all these different types of categories and find out what the specific statistics, easy for me to say, are that you want to go ahead and monitor. You also can, in your Domino administration client, you can set up some preferences. So you do file preferences and then go to administration preferences and click on monitoring. And one of the things you can modify is, if something is has a not responding status, just go ahead and I want to be notified of 5 minutes of inactivity. You can also specify if you want to generate server health statistic and reports. So you can go back and look at those later. And then you want to be notified if a server isn't responding. And the lowest granular you can go is every 1 minute, but you can go up to 60 minutes, and then be notified if a server starts up. So those are just, again, these are free, available to you to help you with just your day-to-day life. So another thing as far as monitoring, so to speak, is are your servers up and running, and what kinds of things can you do to make sure your servers are up and running as seamlessly as possible. And one of the functions that you have, again, built into the server is this thing called automatic server recovery. This is in your server document on the basics tab down towards the bottom, and I highly recommend enabling this. So you'll want to collect an NSD. That's just a note storage dump if you have a server crash. And I want to automatically restart the server if we crash. And what's really important here is, you want to be notified. So down at the very bottom, you can see, you can specify individuals or groups. You might not want to put your boss in there, but you probably want to make sure yourself and your fellow colleagues that are administering the servers are listed so you can get automatic notification. There is something called automatic diagnostic collection. I don't see this enabled very often, and it's unfortunate. This is in the configuration document on that diagnostics tab. And it's really super simple to set it up. You specify what your mail-in database is, your Lotus Notes Domino fault report. That's what it defaults to, so you can leave that. I highly recommend setting it up so that you remove your diagnostic files after a certain number of days, and say yes and then X number of days. So it just basically automatically cleans this up for you. And then again, even if this is enabled, I oftentimes do not see that the fault analyzer is enabled. Highly recommend going and specifying yes. And then what that will do is this analyzer will run against any of your notes storage dumps and do some level of analysis for you. So it's really, really helpful. When you have this enabled in your environment, then you're going to have this fault report available in database. And you can see there are multiple views that are available to you. Here we have by date and then fault analyzed. And that's because I had enabled that functionality, right? To say I want to analyze the faults. If you haven't enabled that, then you would just click on the standard view. But you can see that you can have this not only for servers, but also for clients. So you know, it's clients crash. It's great to actually have this enabled. Because users don't typically tell you that their Notes client crashed unless it's really bad. It happens repeatedly. So it's nice to be able to have that information easily accessible. And what's great is when you have the fault analyzer enabled, if you have a crash, you need to open a case with HCL, you can open up this document associated with the crash. It has all of it has your console log, it has your semaphore debug, it has your important files you're going to need, and then it also does a little bit of analysis, so it's going to tell you which server caused the crash, how many times that crash has occurred, and then what the call stack is, so it gives you some really nice information. So highly recommend getting that set up. Some other things you want to do for monitoring is look at your console. So look at your console log, open up log.sf, pull your console.log file local. You'll be surprised what you find. This was actually in a production environment. So here, admin 4 had not replicated with any other server for, it turns out to be like 71 days. That's a long, long, long time. That's a huge issue. So you'll want to monitor your servers. Maybe you have agents that aren't running because the agent signer doesn't have the proper authority. That's going to all get logged. Maybe R&R isn't able to do all the processing that it should because you haven't enabled auto processing. There's just all kinds of great information that's going to be in your console log. So go ahead and mine that and look at that and know what's normal for your server. So when you look, you can see, hey, this is out of place, but this is normal for my server, so I can ignore it. So very, very helpful. If you have a traveler server to allow your mobile users to be able to get mail on their mobile devices, you want to use Tell Traveler Status. This is a great tool to know what the health of that traveler server is. There are 3 states that you get that it will report back. Or green, obviously that's the desired, no problems. Yellow is, hey, there's a problem, but you don't have to fix it absolutely right now, but you should look at it soon. And red is, hey, you got to do something right now. And these are just a couple of examples. So, current native memory usage, 94% of total available memory. That's kind of something you probably want to look at right away because that's getting really close to the tipping point. Or the specific user has, over 17,000 errors have been logged for a specific user. You want to look into that. So, very, very good tool. As far as the other types of monitoring, you can set up things that are called probes, DDM probes. Domino domain monitoring probes. And those are actually configured in this monitoring and configuration database, which is your events 4. And you can see there's all different types of probes that you can set up by security or web or administration database. There's just all kinds of alerts that you can be set up for. You also have the ability to go in and go to server statistics and then look at your individual statistics for a Domino server. You can see that there's over 1,400 Domino statistics, so there's a lot of great information out there for you to become accustomed with. Again, know what's normal for your server so when something happens, you can quickly hone in on and debugging the problem. So we also have this something called Domino domain monitoring. This is what's really great about this is it gives you one central location you can use to look at everything that's happening for all of your Domino servers in your Domino domain. So it basically will help to prioritize problems. It gives a summary, tells you how many times it's happened. So really, really, very helpful. And how this actually works is we have our monitoring and configuration database at events 4, and that's where we define these are the probes we want to have happening. And then the actual reports, so when a probe is generated, it basically says, hey, I'm set up to run and I found this condition, it creates a report. And those reports get populated into your Domino domain monitoring or ddm.nsf database. So that's basically where you want to go and actually view the information. So here's an example. I can see the server this was generated on, the database that was involved, the specific agent, the user, and then I can see it's happened 2 times. So I know it's not something that's happening a ton, but is happening a couple times. And it tells me that the execution time limit for this specific agent in this specific database signed by this specific user has happened. It wasn't able to complete running because it hit a time limit. And then it gives, what's great about it is it gives you some possible or probable causes, some possible solutions, and then oftentimes it gives you the information for the corrective action. So let's say you do want to increase the maximum time that the agents can be allowed to run. You could just click here and it takes you to that setting, that area in your server document that you can adjust. So it can be very, very helpful to have DDM set up in your environment. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Michelle for critical server maintenance.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Okay, as Kim mentioned earlier, your databases, your NSF files, are a big component of Domino. And you're going to want to do, as any other database storage in any other system, you're going to want to sometimes do maintenance on these files to keep them to their cleanest and most, I guess, fastest running on your server as possible. And the first item we're going to talk about, Fix Up. This actually will test the integrity of Domino databases and resolve corruption problems. And this is especially important if you're not doing transaction logging. I don't believe we spoke about transaction logging in general. And just to kind of brief you on that, on a Domino server, you can set up what is called transaction logging, and all the writes, all the new documents and the changes to documents are written to a transaction log, which is a sequential file. So rather than finding the spot in each of these different databases and opening them, the Domino will write them first to the transaction log, and then another thread in Domino will write those to the database. So the advantage of a transaction log is, should your system crash, your Domino server, rather than just kind of saying, oh my God, I've crashed, I'm going to start up, I have nothing to go back to, anything that was in memory is probably lost, I'm going to have to fix up those databases. Rather than doing that, if your server has transaction logging enabled, your server will read from these transaction logs, apply those changes, and then your startup time is going to be much faster on recovery of a crash. Updal is a program task that runs at 2 a.m. by default every night, and this is going to update your views in your full text indexes that are set to refresh once a day. So a little more information on each. FixUp will read all the database items. So that includes your data notes, so those are your documents, any design notes, so the form design, a view design, also your view indexes, so everything in the database. And it verifies that whatever it's reading is in a format that it's expecting. So if it finds something that's not what it's expecting, if it's not to the format that it wants it to be, the item is going to be either repaired, which really doesn't happen all that often, or purged from the application. So the beauty of a cluster, if it's purged on one server, on one cluster mate, and in one replica of that database. So typically corruption doesn't happen across all replicas. So another replica replicating in will see that that item's been purged. I'm going to give it the item I have over here. So that can be restored that way. FixUp will also verify views. So if a view is not found to be consistent, the view will be marked for a rebuild. Now the FixUp doesn't actually rebuild the view, and it just marks it for the rebuild. And then an updal -r would actually do the rebuild of the view. And FixUp will not run on a database that is open. Well, if it can get a lock on the database, it will run, but then it has that database until it's finished. So then users can't open that database until the FixUp is finished. And then a little bit about updal. Again, this updates views and full text indexes set to that once a day updates. and it runs on 2 a.m. by default, but you can always change that. Again, in the Notes INI, you'll see server tasks at and a number, so that corresponds to the hour of the overnight jobs. So at 2 a.m., this is going to run updal. If the server tasks at 2 equals updal is in your Notes INI. And a thought on updal, and as well as any overnight tasks that you may have set in a program document, try to avoid running those intense operations that may change your databases. Don't run them while backups are being done. And we've given you a couple options for running updal to help you with any corruption issues or suspected corruption issues. You use the -R option on updal if you think a view's corrupted. So if you're just getting weird results in a view in a database or an application that depends on a view in a database, try that updal -R on it, and it may fix your issue. Take a look at the -X option, and that's if you have a full text index on your database and you're getting strange results when you do a full text index search. You may just need that to be rebuilt. And kind of as a best practice, we recommend, especially on heavily used databases, rebuilding those indexes on a monthly, or if it's really a hard used database, maybe even weekly on the weekend and at an off hours time, to rebuild those indexes just to keep them up to snuff. And the other, so those are kind of what we see as the 3 elements of NSF maintenance: fix up, updal, and then the third one is compact. So this is equivalent if you're used to a Windows environment, and I don't know about how many of you remember watching your Windows disk defragged and the bits moving around and getting all happily defragmented. So this is the equivalent of doing that on a Domino database. This will rearrange the database structure and even reduce the file size. If there's been a lot of deletes in that database, you may have a lot of white space, and running a compact can reduce the file size. We had one customer example, and we compacted the databases after an upgrade and recovered 418 gigabytes of disk space, which was a 42% reduction. So it can make a huge difference. This may be that the client had not performed compacts in a while, or maybe with the upgrade, we were upgrading to the next ODS, so there are efficiencies in that on-disk structure as well. But amazing when you think of a 42% reduction, especially on the backups. So as well, there's also a database manage. I have trouble trying to look at the full wording of an acronym often. So DBMT, which is Database Maintenance Tool. So this is a newer task, and we say newer, I think it started in the 9 code stream of Domino. And there's another task that will do a lot of this maintenance that we've already spoken about in a more streamlined manner. So it does a lot of things. As you can see, runs copy style compact operations, purges deletion stubs, expire soft deletes, view indexing, fixes your full text indexes, a whole lot of stuff. And that is a great tool you can have running overnight. And sometimes this will even fix the corruption before you know anything has an issue. So great tool to enable. So we will see it. I think this is actually the same diagram we've used before. So DBMT can be used and run by a program document. And you can see the command line has a number of parameters in it. So you can set more than one thread to be running, for example, for your compact operation, for your updal operation. In this example, it shows 4 threads for compact, 4 threads for updal, and it controls, via this program document, you can see what days it runs. It's a really great way of setting maintenance to run overnight, and you can make sure that it runs in a period of time, so you're really getting the most out of your hours overnight to do as much cleanup of your databases as possible. And you can monitor the execution of DBMT. Kim had shown a full screen showing your Domino tasks running in the Domino admin client, and this is a subset of those. So you can see here there are 4 compact threads running and exactly what they're doing. And you can see the UpDAL, in this example, the UpDAL is idle at this time, but so you're compacting 4 databases at one time. So it's great to get that done overnight. Often we've seen clients that have so much data when they were just running compact, it would not complete in one evening before the start of new business. So this is a great option for those environments. And not to forget about Traveler, there's also maintenance you can do on the internal Traveler database. So this assumes you're using the kind of out-of-the-box Traveler install, which has a local Derby database. You can also, of course, have Traveler storing data in a back-end database if you have DB2 in your environment, for example. But this particular maintenance only applies if it's a Derby database. So you can set the parameters for when this dbmaint runs, so not to be confused with dbmt. So you can set things like how often it runs, what time it runs, just to kind of set granularly, exactly the time you want that to run, and make sure your database is healthy. It used to be that you'd restart it would kick in when you restarted your server. So now it can actually run, for example, on a Sunday night every night. And we talk about databases in a Domino environment, and sometimes there are files that are always in use, like your Domino directory. Expect your names.nsf to always be in use, expect your log.nsf to always be in use, but those need maintenance too. So those you'd want to run maintenance on those databases when the system is down. And depending on your platform, how you run these maintenance tasks will vary, and you'll see the output of the commands in your Domino console once they're done. So we're going to show you some examples of how to run maintenance on different platforms. So running Windows, you change the directory where the executable is. You specify the full path of your database, and this shows you the parameters we're running here, just to kind of show you how you'd run that. And sometimes you'll have a password on your server ID. We don't see that very often, but if be prepared when you're running these tasks. If you do have a password on it, you're going to have to supply the password when you're running them. And similarly, here are the commands for running on Linux. And then we'll go to IBMI. And there you go. So kind of good commands to have in your back pocket.
And just a quick note, we got to make sure that we don't run out of time. So just cognizant of that.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Thanks. So security fundamentals. Let's look at the levels of security in a Domino system. So if you think of going from in the scope of Domino, going kind of from the outside inward, you're going to start with security level server level security, and that's your access control list for your server. And server documents are where you'll find that information. Database, then on the next level in, database level security. Each database will have its own access control list. Roles and access types are going to be defined there. And you could actually encrypt your database. So your data, when it's at rest in your database, could be encrypted. Then further down, you look at your documents in your database, and you could have readers fields, which could limit who can see a document, authors fields, who can see and edit a document. And then further down, you could actually encrypt a given field. So for example, if you were storing passwords, you may want to encrypt that. Let other people, let some people see all the information, but only certain people with the encryption key can see the password. So server level security. Again, we want to see who can access the server. So in the server document security tab, you're going to see in the security access section an access server field. In this example, we have checked off users listed in all trusted directories. So that would always be your names.nsf. And if you have any secondary directories that are set up for authentication, any users in those directories can access the server. You can also put in other people outside your organization. You can see Kim Greene is in here with a few different IDs. So she can access the server with her Kim Greene ID from her company or her internal ID. And there's also a not access server field that's important here. And if you're in one of these, we call them deny access groups. If you're in an access, basically if you're in both fields, the not access server is going to be the access you have, so you won't be able to access the server. So database level security. So this is a screenshot of an access control list of a database. And here in the middle block, you're seeing all the different entries in the ACL, which can include people, groups, or other specific entries like default and anonymous. And on the upper right, you're going to see an access field. This example shows author access. And then if we look lower in the blue outline, you can see different roles. So servers can have many different access levels to a database. So in descending order, you would have manager. So manager could actually change the ACL, which is important, and also could on purpose or accidentally delete the database. So then within that, you have designer, so you can change design elements in the database. And then under that, you can editor, author, reader. Depositor is kind of an interesting one. We see that in web apps. Often if you're filling out a survey and submitting the survey, you'll only have depositor access. And that means you can save a document to that database, but you can't even see it once it's saved. And then there is the all-important no access. And again, we talked about roles. So those are not typically, except for certain system databases, those would be set up by the application designer. So let's talk a little bit about default access as manager. So we like to say this is really not a good idea. So if you are not specifically entered in any of the entries, either explicitly or via a group, then you will have, if you're using a Notes client, default access to that database. So if that access is manager, that could be very dangerous. Usually this is done in error. And if you check, you're going to see there are probably a lot of databases in your environment that applies to. This is one example that we pulled out together. And you can take a look. The default manager access is on the apps1 server, 27 databases. On the dev2 servers, 27. So, mail1, 54 databases. So, these are things you want to dig into and see what the reason is for this default as manager. Anonymous access. So if you're accessing from a web browser, what level of access do you have if you don't authenticate? That is anonymous access. And do you want those web users able to access this database in any way? Maybe not. So set anonymous to no access for all databases except public databases. And if you don't, something to know, if you don't have an anonymous entry in the ACL, the default access is going to apply as your anonymous access. So, have that in mind when you're taking a look at your access control lists. And just as a note, we want people to, just to kind of give you the idea how concerning this might be. If you don't have anonymous in there blocking, set to no access, there are calendar entries in your mail file that are public, set as public access. And so people could read those calendar entries in your mail files. And a little more on security, enforce consistent ACL. That is key. So this setting, which is off by default, it will, if you just check it off, it will ensure the ACL stays consistent across all replicas in your environment. So it's important to set this on a server that has manager access. And then once you set it, it can push that change out to the other replicas on other servers. So very important. You don't want your ACL to change across different replicas. So document level security. Document level security, we talk about authors fields, and this was a level of access we saw in the ACL, and this applies only to any users that have author access to a database. And this is a way of saying if you have author access and you are in an author's type field in a document, you can now edit that database. So you'll see common examples are in the person document, and it's a way of allowing users to edit their own person document. Sometimes you see that in an environment where you may be happy with users entering their home and work details themselves and keeping those up to date. And the user will be either in the owners or administrators field. Those are both author type fields. Readers fields, a different type. This actually defines who can see the document, and this applies to any level in the ACL. So even managers, you can control who can see the document. So this is, you'll see this more in custom built applications, where you don't want the user to see all the information, just the information that applies to them or them explicitly, or the role they're in or a group they're in. So field level security. So you can encrypt fields. So, easy to do from a design perspective, and that would, so then only the specific users that the document has been encrypted for can see that data. You don't see this in default templates, and if you want to learn more, we have a nice handy link for you.
We've got 17 minutes left.
Okay. Securing workstations with ECL management. There's an administration ECL in the Domino environment, and this is at the template for the execution control list, which exists in every Notes client. And this is a mechanism that dictates who can do what in your Notes client. So this is a screenshot of that. We're just going to zip on to the next slide. You can edit it in two ways. So you can go to Actions, Edit Administration, ECL in the Domino admin client. Or you could go into the security settings document and click Edit. So a big warning. Be careful when you're working with the ECL, with the admin ECL. Always use an ID that's already in the ECL, because sometimes even when you're just viewing it, you'll end up signing that administration ECL. And I've been in an environment where someone's done that. They weren't in the admin ECL already, so they were not trusted by all the Notes clients. And what happens is you're sitting there calmly as your Domino administrator, just being chill, and you start hearing beeps, beeps, beeps all around you because everybody in Notes, the system has now merged this admin ECL to your client, but it's signed by somebody that your client does not trust. So a big execution security alert pops up, and users, have no idea what to do with that typically. And then, some of us will realize they'll hit option 4, just trust it, and the problem goes away, but not a very secure method of curing that problem. So ID handling. So when you register a user they are given a digital certificate, and that digital certificate has an expiration date. So you want to stay ahead of this and recertify users before that expiration date. And I like to do it, I think it's by default 2 weeks. People will start getting prompted, letting them know that their certificate's about to expire. So to get in front of that, you could use the certificate expiration view in the Domino directory to see who's about to expire. And then you could select those entries and click the recertify selected people button. Or you could go to the People and Groups tab in your Domino Administrator client and use the recertify tool on the users that you have selected. So good thing to stay in front of. ID Vault. And here's some questions for you. Do you use multiple workstations and want your ID files to be automatically synchronized, the passwords, any name changes? Do you want a way for your help desk to reset passwords easily? Do you want a way for users to reset their own Notes ID password possibly? And if so, this ID Vault is for you. And so, our recommendation is always to use it. We have some customer scenarios to explain why. And, one example is a lost ID. PC crashed, lost ID, had to go back to the original ID, which is on a network drive somewhere, which is now 7 years old. It was created under a certifier, and the person's name may have changed. They may have moved to a new certifier, so that ID is not going to be valid anymore. Forgotten passwords, and setting up new and existing users. The Notes client will actually pull the ID from the vault when you put their name in and spell it properly. So there's no manual handling of an ID file. You don't have to get a file to people. They can it just pulls down during the install. And a little bit about securing web access. You can set up an internet password lockout, and this is a mechanism for if someone's trying to log in to the web, and could be a brute force attack. It's going to set a threshold for internet password authentication failures. And you set this up in the configuration document security tab, and this gives you control over, it's off by default, by the way. So you just set it to yes, and you can log lockouts and failures. You can set minimum tries allowed, and when that resets, that type of thing. So a good, if you have HTTP access to your server, is a good thing to implement. There's also the concept of securing your HTTP passwords with if most environments, the HTTP password is stored in the person document, but it's encoded in a hash algorithm. And as Domino has progressed over the years, the algorithms are harder and harder to crack. So HTTP passwords, they can be vulnerable if they're not properly protected, because you can see this hashed value in a view. So to upgrade the password hash, it's a two-step process. You'd edit your directory profile. And again, this is not enabled by default, but you just want to set use more secure internet password and choose the yes option for the highest version of Domino or greater. And then you go in and you would upgrade person documents to use a more secure internet password. So this resaves that internet password in the higher hashing algorithm, much harder to crack. You can also, another thing would be to adjust HTTP methods. So you want to prevent trace method on public servers typically. So, if enabled, you can actually provide valuable information. If the trace option is enabled, hackers can use that for their own good. So if you disable trace, you can actually prevent some of these cross-site scripting attacks. And back to Kim.
Okay. Thank you. So next up is Domino High Availability, which we get that function, again, it's built into the server, something called clustering. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. And what a Domino cluster is it basically it's a collection of servers. You can have a minimum of 2, but you can also have up to 6. And it provides a couple of different functions for you. Most commonly we see it used for high availability. You also can use it for workload balancing. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But basically this gives you that ability to, if server goes down, then the users have another server or other servers that they can access. So the two different types of clustering is failover. Again, this is where we this is what we see most commonly used in our customer environments, where there's a primary server, and when that primary server becomes unavailable, then one or two or three or whatever number of servers that happen to be in that cluster then become available for the users. You can also use it for workload balancing. So maybe you don't want all of your work on one server and you have a server that's too overloaded. You can specify that I want to set this server up so I only want 250 users, for example, on this server. I only want this server to be up to 60% utilized. So it allows you to spread that workload out a little bit more. There are two key tasks with domino clustering. There's something called the cluster replicator, or CL REPL. And as the name implies, that basically that's really what does the cluster replication. So it makes sure that databases on each server in that cluster are kept up to date. And then there's something called the cluster database directory task, the CLDB-dir. And that basically is the task that makes sure that your database directory that contains information about the databases in your cluster, makes sure that's up to date. So how does failover actually work? So in this specific scenario, we have a cluster of two servers, server A and server B, and we have our end user sitting at their Notes client, and they normally would connect into server A, but server A became unavailable. So the Notes client will say, hey, this is who I normally connect to. It's going to get back a response saying, hey, not responding, and then it automatically gets failed over to server B. So it's really slick how it works. You also have the ability to do load balancing. So then you can plan how busy a server is. You can specify the number of users on a server. Just gives you another way to manage your overall environment. So domino clustering, this is the key part of your high availability solution or your load balancing. And as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, anytime a domino server has been added to a cluster, its database directory gets converted to the CLDB-dir, or the cluster database directory. And in this cluster database directory, it's really helpful to sort by, there's different views you can see, but here we're at databases by replica ID. And what's really great here is I can look and see very quickly, oh, hey, I'm missing my stat mail is only on DOM test 1. Maybe I want to create a replica of that on DOM test 2. Just a heads up that the domino domain monitoring database is disabled out of the box, so it doesn't take part of this. So that's considered normal. The way that you actually would manage the databases that are considered in the database cluster, not every single database in a clustered server has to be considered a clustered server or clustered database. So you can select individual databases and say, I want to enable cluster replication, I want to disable cluster replication. Typically, you're going to have it enabled on all your databases, but you do have that tool available to you in the cluster database directory. Domino replication. This basically, it's domino replication is built into the server. It's actually something it's one of the standouts that makes Domino just really super impressive as far as what it can do. It takes, and you can have multiple replicas of a database, and it synchronizes those. So whether it's even across servers, or it could be that you have it's synchronizing and keeping a local, lots of times people will have a local mail replica for maybe better performance or working offline. That will keep this functionality, this replication functionality, keeps those databases synchronized. And the way that that's controlled is actually by the replica ID. If you go to File Application Properties and go to the Information tab, you'll see the replica ID here. There are different types of replication. We have something called push replication, which is, it's very self-explanatory. So it's basically going to send changes from this server that's initiating replication. It's going to push those changes off to one of the other servers, off to the remote server pull. The exact opposite of that is pulling those changes. You can have pull push replication, which if you use the rep command, for example, at the console, I want to do a pull push replication from the server that I'm issuing it on to a remote server for this specific application. So that is how that the different kinds of replication work. And think back to what Michelle covered about the access control list. If you don't have your access control list set up correctly, your data may not replicate. And we see this quite often in environments where people use readers fields or authors fields and they forget about it, or they maybe they have a database and now they want to include it in clustering, and it doesn't have the local domain servers, for example, added to the ACL. So when that database replicates, the data can't replicate over to the other servers if the servers don't have access to it. So that ACL will always rule. So make sure that whatever servers you are replicating to has proper access to the data in the databases. When you actually create a new replica, you'll have something that's called a replica stub, and it's really just a shell. It has the database replica ID, and then it has the database name, certainly in the title, but it doesn't contain any data. And if you go to your file tab and you see this asterisk and then the replica ID, that's what that is. It's easily remedied. All you have to do is go in and do replication, force replication, or let the schedule replication, which again is controlled by your connection documents, and it'll replicate that data into that file. Quotas are something that we use often on mail files, and it allows you to say that you don't want someone's mail file to be over 20 gig. I mean, that's still quite generous, but over a certain size. One thing that's really important to understand, or multiple things important to understand about quotas, is cluster replication. Its job, that CLRepl task, is to keep those databases on these different servers synchronized, and it doesn't care what the quota is. So it's going to replicate the data over, so that the data will get over to the other replicas on the other servers. However, the quota, and when you create a new replica, it will, from an existing replica, it will take whatever the quota is, and that's what gets the quotas. That's how it gets set on this new replica that's created on the other server. But it never changes. So it's set once and it's never changed. So what we see often happens is users are on their primary server, their quotas, as they bump up against their quota, the administrator goes in and it says, okay, I can give you a larger quota, but then if they have a failover, they've forgotten about adjusting the quota on the secondary server, and the users can no longer do anything until those quotas get adjusted. So just something to be aware of, that the quotas, if you make changes to them, they do not replicate. And that takes us to the end, and we actually did finish with a few minutes to spare. So do we have any questions?
We do. Reminder to folks, because we do have a few minutes, to pop your questions into the questions panel, and we'll jump in and see if we can get through as many as we got. This is a good one, actually. How can we get a list of all agents that run on a server, not just scheduled agents, via the tell a manager schedule command? As a developer, I'm thinking about that answer.
All agents that run on a server,
It's kind of, I think it comes down to wording, because of course my first thought was, well, that's all scheduled agents, but it's, the question includes not just scheduled agents. So that means what? Any kind of agent that could be run in an app? I don't know that there's a way to do that.
Click on if it's invoked by the end user. I don't know that there is any way that you can get those. I mean, you can get scheduled agents, certainly. The closest you could come to perhaps finding that information, I don't think, though, unless it's scheduled, would be the Wytria tools, the agent easy
that's
tool.
What I was thinking too.
But nothing that's built into the server itself.
So for people who don't know, there are third-party tools that are available that work with Notes and Domino, and Wytria is a long-standing good member of the community that's got some really fantastic tools. That was what I thought of too. Michelle, any other thing to add there?
That's exactly what I was going to say too. And just to, if anyone's interested, the company it's spelled YTRIA, and if you're looking for something, a tool like that, they are an excellent company to deal with.
Okay, next question. With clusters, What happens when one server's down and you have an @db lookup command with a hard-coded server reference to the down server?
It don't work.
Nice and simple. Yep, it
Yep.
does not
It's
work.
basic. Yep. It won't work, and that's actually one of the things that we do, and we work with customers in making their environment highly available. Is we look at their custom applications and we look at their @db lookups and any lookup information to make sure that the hard coding is not in there, but that will have to be removed from not being hard coded.
Yep. Okay, and that's what we've got. Very positive feedback that we have from folks, and I want to just kind of wrap up quickly with, the comment here from the person asking the question was, "I learned stuff today." This is just another example of how we in the community are able to share, and because Domino is such a vast topic. Even those of us that have been in the community for a long time learn stuff every time we do one of these. So please jump in, ask questions, participate, answer questions. And for those of you that have been around for a while and think this is an interesting topic and you have something that you might like to share in a Domino for Newbies presentation, please get in touch with us and we can line up, even if you've got something that might take 5 minutes, we can line up several people to give their own little tips and tricks and just, again, share so that we all learn from each other. And with that, I will say thank you to Kim and Michelle and everybody else for participating and wish you all a good rest of your day. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.